Hello, Gemini. Thank you for spending a little time here with me. If Gemini is your sun, moon, or rising sign, there may be something in this reading that speaks to a chapter of your life you're currently moving through. If this message resonates with you, feel free to leave a comment and share a little of your experience. This is a collective tarot reading, so take what feels meaningful for your journey and gently leave behind anything that doesn't. The cards are simply the starting point of the conversation. Your intuition, your feelings, and your lived experience are the most important part of this journey. There are seasons in life when change doesn't begin with a dramatic event. No door slams shut. No clear ending takes place. No life-altering decision is made. It's just a feeling that's difficult to name. A feeling that quietly appears somewhere deep within you. It's like driving down the same familiar road you've taken every day. Everything looks the same. The scenery is the same. Your routine is the same. And yet somehow the way you feel about it all isn't quite the same anymore. That's the energy coming through so strongly in this reading. The Eight of Cups card doesn't arrive with the feeling of giving up, nor does it speak about turning your back on something meaningful. It feels more like a moment when a person begins to realize that their emotions are shifting faster than they expected. You may still be doing the same work, still maintaining the same relationship, still pursuing a goal you've carried for a long time, still living life in a way that looks perfectly fine from the outside. Yet somewhere within, a small question begins to surface. A question you may not have asked yourself before. How do I really feel about this? What's interesting is that Gemini isn't usually the type to sit with a question like that for very long. You're used to moving forward. When things become complicated, you look for solutions. When emotions become confusing, you try to make sense of them. When exhaustion shows up, you often tell yourself that things will feel better if you just keep going. And many times that approach has worked. This time feels a little different. The feeling doesn't completely disappear after a day of rest. It doesn't fade after you've convinced yourself that you're probably overthinking things. It stays, quietly, patiently, like a small voice asking to be heard. That may be why you've started paying closer attention to yourself lately. Things that once excited you don't create the same reaction they used to. Things that once felt incredibly important sometimes seem strangely ordinary. And things you barely noticed before are beginning to catch your attention. Not because you're becoming a completely different person, but because a part of you is trying to show you something. The Eight of Cups card often appears when someone is standing between two versions of themselves. One part wants to keep going exactly as things are. Another part feels like it's slowly outgrowing an older chapter of life. That space is rarely comfortable. Most of us like clear answers. We like knowing where we're headed. We like knowing what's right. We like knowing what to hold on to and what to release. Yet right now, things seem to be living in the space between. Not clear enough to draw conclusions, but no longer the same as before. And that's where the Ten of Cups card comes through. What I feel from this card isn't the image of a perfect destination. It isn't a story where everything suddenly falls into place. It feels deeper than that. It feels like living in alignment with what your heart truly needs. Some people accomplish a great deal and still feel that something is missing. Others move more slowly, change less, take smaller steps, yet every step brings them closer to a sense of peace within themselves. The Ten of Cups card carries that feeling. It suggests that beyond the uncertainty you're experiencing now, there may be a path that holds more meaning than you can currently see. Not because it's easier, but because it's more authentic. That doesn't mean you need to rush into any decisions. In fact, this reading feels more like the opposite. It feels like a reminder that sometimes the wisest thing you can do isn't to act immediately. It's to give yourself enough space to listen. To listen to emotions you've been brushing aside. To listen to the quiet signals life keeps placing in front of you. To listen to the changes unfolding within. Because the more closely you observe, the more you may realize that the real question isn't whether you should stay or leave. The real question may be whether an older version of you is slowly becoming too small for where you're headed next. And as that realization begins to take shape, an entirely different story starts to unfold. Some choices in life don't appear in the form of a door. They appear in the form of a question you can't answer right away, because the answer seems to change from one day to the next. There are mornings when you wake up feeling motivated. Everything still feels worth the effort. You look ahead and think that maybe, with just a little more time, things will start to make sense. Then a few days later, that feeling shifts. Not because anything bad happened. Not because you failed. The excitement that once got you out of bed full of energy just doesn't feel as strong as it used to. And that's often the kind of feeling that makes people question themselves. They wonder whether they're losing interest or finally seeing something important. Is this a sign to stop? Or is it simply a normal season of fatigue on a longer journey? Gemini usually isn't afraid of starting. The harder part is continuing, because there's always a deep curiosity living inside you, a new idea, a new road, a new possibility. Something off in the distance that seems more exciting than what's right in front of you. That's a gift, but sometimes it's also a challenge, because when progress moves slower than expected, the mind naturally starts looking elsewhere. You may be working toward a goal you've carried for a long time, a project, a career path, a personal vision, or maybe you're simply trying to build a new version of yourself, yet the results haven't arrived as quickly as you hoped. You show up every day. You keep putting in the effort. You keep doing what needs to be done. The emotional reward just hasn't caught up yet. There's a gap between what you're giving and what you're receiving. And that gap often creates doubt. The Three of Pentacles card makes me think of something being built from the inside out. The most important parts are rarely the ones people can see. They're hidden in the foundation, buried deep beneath the surface, tucked inside small details that go unnoticed. Found in the days when no one applauds your effort. Most things with lasting value go through a season like that. Quiet, repetitive, not particularly exciting, not dramatic, but necessary. At the same time, the Three of Cups card carries a different feeling. Part of you still remembers what it felt like when everything was new, when every step felt exciting, when progress created a rush of energy. Maybe you miss that feeling. Maybe you've been wondering why it doesn't show up as often anymore. What's interesting is that maturity doesn't always come from feeling inspired all the time. Sometimes it comes from continuing even when inspiration decides to take a break. The Seven of Wands card appears here as the image of someone standing firm on ground they've worked hard to build. Not because it's easy, but because they understand they've come too far to turn around, simply because they're going through a season of low motivation. There will be days when you can't see the results. That doesn't mean the results aren't there. Some seeds take a long time before anything appears above the soil. From the outside, it may look like nothing is happening. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, an entire root system is quietly growing. Maybe the most important question right now isn't whether you should give up. Maybe it's asking yourself, what made you begin in the first place? What made your heart believe this was worth trying? What made you trust this path? Because sometimes the answer isn't found in searching for a new road. Sometimes it's found in reconnecting with the value of the road you're already on. And as your attention slowly returns to that deeper truth, a small doorway seems to appear ahead, not fully open. Not clear enough to see everything waiting on the other side, but clear enough to know that this story still has more to reveal. The most important decisions in life aren't always made during highly emotional moments. More often, they're shaped during very ordinary days, days when no obvious signs appear. No one walks into your life and changes everything. No message arrives telling you that you're on the right path. It's just you, and the small choices you continue making day after day. One thing I notice in this part of the reading is that you're beginning to see things more realistically than before. Not because you've lost your optimism, and not because you've become rigid. A more mature part of you is simply starting to speak a little louder. The Emperor card makes me think of the moment when someone stops asking what life is going to do for them. Instead, they begin asking a different question. What am I going to do with what's already in front of me? That's a very different question. It doesn't hand the power over to circumstances. It brings that power back to the person asking it. There may have been moments recently when you were waiting for a clearer sign, a stronger sense of certainty, a reason that would make everything feel easier. Yet, the farther you travel on a path like this, the more you realize that not everything meaningful begins with certainty. Sometimes it begins with a choice, a simple choice to keep showing up, to keep learning, to keep building, even when you can't see the entire picture yet. The Eight of Pentacles card carries a feeling I really love in a reading like this. It reminds me of people who spend years developing a skill, not because they're inspired every single day, but because they understand that inspiration isn't always what gets you where you want to go. Some days it's simply about being present, about returning to what matters one more time. Maybe no one notices. Maybe no one gives you credit for it. Yet, every time you come back, another brick is added to the foundation. And eventually people look at the finished result and forget that it was built through hundreds of small, almost invisible efforts. What's interesting is that many people don't walk away because they lack ability. They walk away because they underestimate the power of small progress. They assume that if they can't see a dramatic result, nothing is changing. When in reality, some of the most important changes happen so quietly they're almost impossible to notice while they're taking place. The Four of Wands card brings up the idea of rhythm, not an explosion, not a giant leap forward, just rhythm. The steady rhythm that allows something to grow over time, like the way a song is carried by its beat, like the way nature moves through its seasons. There are periods when everything seems still, yet beneath the surface, life continues moving at its own pace. And sometimes the thing that exhausts people most is comparing their timing to someone else's. You see someone moving faster, reaching a milestone sooner, arriving somewhere you still feel far away from. It can seem as though they've already arrived while you're still making your way there. Yet every journey has its own structure. Every story unfolds in its own rhythm. Not everything that arrives quickly stays for long, and not everything that grows slowly lacks value. The Lover's card comes through here with a feeling that's deeper than choice alone. It feels like inner alignment. That moment when you begin recognizing what genuinely fits who you are. Not the most exciting thing. Not the newest thing. Not the thing that earns the most admiration from other people. But the thing that allows you to feel honest with yourself. That's why this card feels so important after everything you've been moving through. Because sometimes life isn't asking us to search for more options. It's asking us to understand the option we've already chosen. To understand why we started, why we're still here. Why a part of our heart isn't ready to let go. And as that clarity slowly begins to settle in, another challenge quietly comes into view. The question is no longer whether you should stay or leave. It's how you move through the seasons when faith in your path has to become stronger than your temporary emotions. The older we get, the more we begin to understand that patience isn't about sitting still and waiting. It's about continuing to move forward when you still can't see the full result of what you're building. That sounds simple enough. Until you actually find yourself living through a season like that. There are times when life feels like a book that's still being written. You've read enough pages to know you care about the story. You've invested enough of yourself that you don't want to walk away from it. And yet the next chapters haven't revealed themselves yet. You don't know what's waiting on the pages ahead. You don't know whether the effort you've poured into this journey will lead where you hope it will. And often, that's the part that wears people down, not the work. Not the responsibility, but the feeling of having to keep going without enough evidence to reassure yourself. The Eight of Cups card comes through here like someone standing between two voices. One voice says things are moving too slowly. The other reminds you that not everything valuable reveals its results right away. You may have felt this in other areas of your life before. A time when you gave something your full attention. You tried, you adjusted, you learned, you stayed committed. Yet when you look back, it felt as though everything was still standing in the same place. That's usually when doubt begins to slip in. Not doubt about the path itself, but doubt about your ability to keep walking it. The truth is, Gemini loves movement. You love discovering new things. You love learning. You love seeing energy flow. You love feeling like life is expanding. When you're stuck in a stretch of time that feels too long and too unchanged, the mind naturally starts looking outward. It starts searching for something newer, faster, more exciting. Something that seems to offer clearer progress. Not because you lack commitment, but because part of your nature is always reaching toward growth. The thing is, not every new door holds the answer. Sometimes the most important skill is staying long enough to watch what you're building mature. The Eight of Pentacles card makes me think of people who spend years learning an instrument. On the first day, they don't sound very good. Sometimes not even after the first month. There are days when they feel themselves improving. And there are days when it feels like they're standing completely still. What creates the difference isn't talent. It's the decision to come back one more time. And then one more time after that. And then again. Eventually, the things that once seemed insignificant begin to accumulate into something remarkable. The hardest part is almost always the stretch of time before that growth becomes visible. That's where many people choose to leave, not because they failed, but because they left too soon. The Seven of Wands card carries a different feeling. It isn't about winning. And it isn't about proving anything to anyone. It feels more like someone protecting something they know matters. Even when nobody else sees its value yet. Even when the results haven't appeared. Even when they're tired themselves. There's a huge difference between walking away because something no longer fits your life and walking away because you've run out of patience. Those two feelings can look surprisingly similar, but they're not the same. One comes from clarity. The other comes from exhaustion. And one of the strongest messages I feel in this reading is that you're learning how to tell the difference. You're learning not to make life-changing decisions because you're having one difficult day. You're learning to allow a journey to move slowly without automatically assuming it's moving in the wrong direction. That's a very quiet form of growth. Most people never see it, yet it changes a person in profound ways. Because after a while, you begin to realize that strength isn't always found in moving faster. Sometimes strength is found in still being here, still showing up, still honoring the promises you've made to yourself. And from that place, a different perspective begins to emerge. Less focused on how much longer it will take for results to appear. More focused on the things quietly taking shape behind the scenes, in places the eye can't fully see yet. Not all growth makes noise. Some of the most important things that happen in life unfold so quietly that we only recognize them after we've traveled far enough to look back. And I think that's one reason people often misjudge the season they're in. They focus on what hasn't arrived yet. They focus on what's still missing. They focus on the distance between where they are and where they want to be. Meanwhile, the real changes are happening in places that receive very little attention. That's the energy I feel in the Three of Pentacles card. It reminds me of those stretches of life when rewards don't show up right away. The days look almost identical. The work still needs to be done. The responsibilities are still there. The effort still has to continue. At first glance, everything seems so ordinary that it's difficult to notice anything changing at all. Yet those are often the exact seasons when people are building skills, habits, and foundations that will support them for years to come. Not everyone enjoys that process because it rarely feels exciting. It doesn't offer quick victories. It doesn't give other people an immediate reason to notice your progress. It's simply accumulation. Little by little, quietly, consistently, the kind of growth that even the person experiencing it may not recognize. Until one day, life presents a new challenge, and they suddenly realize they're much stronger than they used to be. Something else that stands out in this reading is that alongside this building energy, the Three of Cups card appears as well. This card doesn't feel like a celebration or a big party to me. At least, that's not the feeling it carries here. It feels more like a connection to the things that make your heart feel lighter. Maybe it's a conversation that leaves you feeling understood. Maybe it's a moment when you realize you no longer need to work so hard to be someone else. Maybe it's the feeling of belonging somewhere, with certain people. Or simply the feeling of being yourself without needing to explain who you are. Sometimes people believe happiness arrives through major changes, a new career, a major achievement, a life-changing opportunity. Yet there are seasons when happiness shows up in much smaller forms. A peaceful afternoon, an easy conversation, a quiet moment when you realize you've slowed down enough to actually experience your life. And that matters more than many people realize. Because when the heart feels nourished, we gain the strength to continue the longer journeys. That's where the Ten of Cups card gradually enters the story, not as some distant destination, but as a reminder that the things that truly last often begin with very simple moments. They don't appear overnight. They're built through small experiences that slowly connect together, through repeated choices, through the moments when you continue trusting what you're building, through the times you choose maturity instead of reacting to temporary emotions. Some people spend their entire lives chasing the feeling of victory, when what they're really searching for is fulfillment. Those aren't always the same thing. Victory can come and go. Fulfillment is usually built much more slowly. It begins to emerge when your life starts reflecting the values that genuinely matter to you. And one of the strongest feelings I get from this reading is that you're closer to that energy than you realize. Not because everything is finished, not because the journey is complete, but because some of the most important pieces are slowly falling into place. From the outside, no one may be able to see the full picture yet. Sometimes even you can't see it clearly. Yet beneath the surface, the pieces are beginning to connect. And as that happens, another truth starts becoming visible. Your strength isn't only found in what you're building. It's also found in the person you've become while building it. People often measure their strength by their brightest moments. The days when everything is working. The days when energy comes easily. The days when inspiration seems to arrive on its own. The days when moving forward feels effortless. Yet the longer we live, and the more life we experience, the more we begin to realize that those moments aren't necessarily where real strength is built. Because anyone can keep going when the wind is at their back. Anyone can believe in themselves when results keep showing up. Anyone can feel confident when life seems to be rewarding their efforts. The real difference often reveals itself on the opposite kind of day. The days when you wake up without excitement. The days when you look at your goals and feel very little motivation. The days when part of you wants rest more than progress. That's where I feel the energy of the Seven of Wands card. Not as someone fighting the world, not as someone trying to prove something, but as someone protecting their own commitment. Because sometimes the greatest challenge doesn't come from external circumstances. It comes from the conversation happening within. One voice says you've already done enough. Another reminds you that some things simply take longer than expected. One part of you wants an easier path. Another understands that growth rarely unfolds in a straight line. The space between those voices is often where maturity begins, not by eliminating emotion, not by forcing yourself to stay positive all the time, but by learning how to live alongside your emotions without allowing them to make every decision for you. That's a very different skill, and it's not a skill anyone learns overnight. The Emperor card makes me think of someone who has started building trust with themselves, not loud confidence, not the feeling of always knowing exactly what they're doing, but the quiet trust that no matter what mood they're in, they'll continue showing up for what matters. And honestly, I think that's one of the rarest forms of strength there is. Because many people only believe in themselves when they feel good. They trust their abilities when everything is going well. They trust their path when doubt isn't present. Real life doesn't work that way. There are days when you feel like you're making progress, and days when it feels like you're standing still. Days when everything seems meaningful, and days when you question almost everything. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And one of the things that stands out most in this reading is the feeling that you're beginning to understand that. You're no longer trying to eliminate every doubt. You're no longer forcing yourself to stay inspired all the time. You're no longer believing that every day has to feel motivated in order to be the right path. A new kind of calm is starting to take shape, a very quiet kind of maturity. Like someone who no longer gets pulled around by every wave on the surface because they've come to understand there's an entire ocean beneath it. When the Seven of Wands card appears alongside the Emperor card, it feels like the story of a person learning how to become their own source of stability. Not always perfect, not always strong, not always certain, but steady enough to keep moving, patient enough to stay with the journey, wise enough to understand that emotions are only one part of the story. And that's more important than many people realize. Because after everything that's unfolded so far, this reading no longer feels focused on what you're building. It begins to focus on who you're becoming while you build it. And from that inner shift, another chapter seems to be slowly emerging. A chapter where the first signs of movement may start becoming easier to recognize than they were before. There are moments in life that feel strangely difficult to explain. Nothing on the outside seems all that different. You still wake up at the same time. You still move through the same routines. You still pass through days that appear almost identical to the ones before. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, you begin to sense a subtle shift. Something small, something quiet, something that's difficult to name. It's a little like the way the air changes before a new season officially arrives. Not obvious enough to see, but noticeable enough to feel. That's the feeling coming through in this part of the reading. This doesn't feel like the energy of a sudden breakthrough. It doesn't feel like everything changing overnight. It feels more like a machine that has been working quietly for a very long time, slowly moving toward the moment when all the moving parts finally begin to work together. I think one reason people often miss this stage is because it isn't particularly dramatic. When we imagine change, we usually picture something big, an opportunity appearing, a door opening, a clear turning point. Yet many meaningful shifts begin with signs so small they're easy to overlook. A different way of thinking, a different response to something that once bothered you. A new perspective, a challenge that somehow feels easier to handle than it did before. Those are often the first indications that all the effort you've been investing is beginning to create something tangible. The Eight of Pentacles card makes me feel that you've been in this process longer than you realize. There have probably been days when it seemed like nothing was moving. Days when you questioned whether any of your effort was truly making a difference. Yet so much of life works through accumulation. One small action rarely changes everything. 100 small actions tell a completely different story. What's fascinating is that people often overestimate what can happen in a week, yet they underestimate what can change through consistent effort over a much longer period of time. It feels as though you may be standing very close to the meeting point between two different chapters. One chapter centered around preparation, and another where the things you've been preparing finally have a chance to reveal their value. The Four of Wands card brings through a feeling of stability, a sense that the rhythm of your life is becoming more settled, less back and forth, less second-guessing. Less pressure to constantly convince yourself that you're doing the right thing. Less searching outside yourself for every answer. A new balance seems to be forming. Not perfect balance, but the kind that allows you to keep moving forward without spending so much energy fighting yourself along the way. And that's worth paying attention to, because when inner conflict begins to quiet down, the energy that was once spent on doubt can finally be redirected toward action. And that's often when movement starts becoming more noticeable. The Ace of Pentacles card appears here like a seed that's ready for its next stage of growth. I don't experience this card as an unexpected gift arriving from somewhere outside of you. It feels more like the natural result of everything that's been nurtured over time. After all, an opportunity only becomes meaningful when we've grown into someone who can recognize it and make use of it. That's why sometimes the first thing to change isn't the circumstance. It's us, the way we see ourselves, the way we respond to challenges, the way we handle delays and uncertainty. All of those things help create the moment we're standing in now. So rather than rushing toward the future with impatience, this reading seems to encourage something else. Keep your rhythm. Keep doing what matters. Keep placing one small brick at a time. Not because you have something to prove, but because what you're building has started developing a life of its own. Sometimes the greatest progress doesn't come from changing direction. It comes from trusting yourself enough to continue walking the path you've already chosen. And somewhere at the intersection of persistence and trust, a final confirmation seems to be quietly waiting to reveal itself. The thing that stays with me most from this reading isn't what's changing around you. It's the clarity that's beginning to emerge within you. Because there are seasons in life that convince us the answer must be found in something more. One more opportunity, one more option, one more direction, one more door to open. Yet the farther we travel along the path of growth, the more we begin to realize that sometimes what we need isn't more choices. What we need is a deeper connection to something that already mattered from the very beginning. That's the feeling I get when I look at the Two of Cups card and the Lovers card appearing at the end of this reading. This isn't the energy of impulsive decisions. It isn't the feeling of being swept away by a powerful emotional moment. And it isn't temporary excitement. It feels more like a quiet nod from somewhere deep within. A sense of peace that comes from realizing something still holds value, even after time has passed. Some things exist only because they're new, and when the novelty fades, they fade with it. But there are other things that reveal their true worth through challenge. A relationship, a dream, a career path, a healing journey, a new version of yourself. Those things don't survive because of inspiration alone. They survive because they're rooted in sincerity. And sincerity tends to last far longer than temporary emotions. I think that's why these final two cards appear after everything you've moved through in this story. Not at the beginning, not in the middle, but here at the end. Almost as if before you could recognize what truly belongs in your life, you needed to walk through periods of uncertainty. Days when motivation felt distant. Moments when you questioned whether you should continue at all. Not to shake your confidence, but to help you see more clearly. Because when the emotional noise settles, what's left is often the truth. The Lovers card carries a feeling of alignment for me in this reading. Not perfection, not a life where everything becomes easy, but the feeling that some part of you recognizes the value of what you're connected to, even when parts of the journey don't make complete sense, even when another direction occasionally catches your attention, even when progress feels slower than you'd like. Some connections aren't meant to keep us constantly excited. They're meant to help us grow. And the older we become, the more we realize that the things worth holding on to are rarely the things that create the strongest emotional highs. They're the things that remain after the emotional waves have passed. And maybe that's the most beautiful message within this reading. Not a promise about a future outcome. Not a prediction about how everything will unfold, but a reminder that you're allowed to trust the values that have already proven their meaning in your life. You're allowed to trust what you've spent time building. You're allowed to continue investing in what feels most authentic to you, not because someone else told you to, but because after everything you've experienced, you're beginning to understand more clearly what truly matters. And sometimes that's already a profound transformation, because there are journeys that don't end with finding an answer. They end with finding your trust in yourself again. If something in this reading resonated with you, keep what feels meaningful for your own story. And anything that doesn't belong to your path, allow it to remain behind. Thank you for spending this time with me. And perhaps the most beautiful part of the journey isn't where the road eventually leads. Perhaps it's the fact that you kept walking long enough to become more fully yourself along the way.